Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and today's guest is April Heinze. And April is the Chief of 911 Operations for the National Emergency Number Association. So NENA is this called. And so when you call 911, she is probably working with one of those operators in her organization and helping them stay current on all the regulations and training and needs and things like that. So, April, welcome to the show and appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, tell our listeners what you do, what the association's really doing to support the I don't know how many 911 operators and people that are involved in dispatch like that, but give us a little background.
Okay. So NENA is a standards body, and as a standards body, we set standards and best practices, along with we provide government advocacy and education and training for our nation's 911 centers. But we're a international organization.
Okay.
So it's not just the United States that we work with. We also work with Canada and Mexico and many other South American countries, because 911 is
a universal number, right?
Yes. So with that, as a standards body, what we do with standards is those standards help the 911 entities across the United States and elsewhere to set their local policies and procedures and protocols that they're going to follow, so that they are basically all doing the same thing.
They're following the same process.
Exactly.
So yeah, if you receive a call, most operators are going to go through the same type of questioning call tree, so to speak, of, what's your name? Where are you at? What's the emergency? Those kind of questions. Is that
Precisely.
What you're talking about?
Yep, precisely. So we have a call. One of the standards that we have is our 911 call processing standard, and that allows the 911 centers to create their own procedures based on that.
Okay.
We also, you kind of wondered about how many 911 centers there are. There are about 5,100 primary PSAPs, or public safety answering points, throughout the United States.
Okay.
And as a primary, that means they actually answer the 911 call.
Sure. Okay.
There's another set of numbers for secondary PSAPs, or what that means is the dispatch point.
Okay.
So we typically will say there's somewhere around 6,000 911 centers in the United States, but that number is really kind of a fluid number because of the secondary PSAPs.
Okay.
And those it's hard to quantify, but when you're talking about 911, it's a local entity.
Yeah.
And because it's a local entity, there's no federal regulation or federal data center that houses all information about 911.
Yeah.
So what you get, there are reports that are done on an annual basis at the federal level, but those reports are voluntary reports. So you don't get all of the information.
Okay.
So it's hard to specifically pinpoint specific numbers on a lot of things.
And so there's no main kind of data warehouse that's, holding all the call information nationally or countrywide that they can get access. It's all somewhere local.
For the most part, yes. So NENA does have a PSAP registry. So we have all of the primary 911 centers throughout the United States in this registry. It's actually quite prolific, and we created it for 911 centers to use for unusual call transfer situations.
Okay.
We do allow our non-PSAP users, like pipelines, railroads, telehealth providers, etc., access to that for a cost, and that's how we maintain that registry. It's actually quite informative. It's got a lot of really rich data in it. The problem is I mentioned all of the secondary PSAPs. So I can tell you precisely how many primary
primaries,
PSAPs we
but the
have.
secondary.
Secondaries, if they're not in our registry, then
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
have that number.
Well, for the listeners, I met April this week. We're at the Rail Hazmat Thought Leadership Summit. And we're bringing together, the purpose of this conference was to bring together all the thought leaders in the emergency response rail community. And so we're listening to everyone's perspective on, what's important to them to help, I guess, define or shore up the gaps in the readiness response capability of the emergency response community. And one of the individuals that I became aware of that I had no idea that I don't even know why I didn't think of it, was the 911 call people. They're the first people to get the darn call. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So, and then you explaining that, you were so happy that you were invited and had a seat at the table, and that had never really happened before. I was pretty floored, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that actually, it happens quite a bit, because if you think about it, 911, they're behind the scenes.
Right.
So although there are 4 pillars to public safety, the public safety community as a whole,
Yeah.
you've got the emergency communications center,
Yeah.
you've got police, fire, and EMS,
Yeah.
right? But those that are noticed and seen are police, fire, and EMS,
yeah,
right?
right.
They're the ones that are out in the public. That's
Yeah.
what people think of.
Right.
And we, when you're talking about any number of different public safety responses,
Yeah.
it makes sense. You're going to
Yeah.
invite the folks that are the responders.
Right.
They just don't simply realize that there's that 4th
Yeah.
unseen leg
Yeah.
in this or pillar in the response.
And they're like the first line of defense.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one thing I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know why we would never have thought about. And I'm kind of curious, you don't really ever go out to any of these sites. You're never physically seeing any of these derailments or emergencies per se, because
that's necessarily true.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of 911 centers that have specialized teams.
Yeah.
For incident dispatch.
Okay.
So in large scale events like this, they will respond to the command post. They will work in the command post.
Oh.
They do all of the logging and do all of the same stuff.
So you have some like field services you offer too, and not just behind the desk.
Many of our public
Oh.
safety answering points do this. I personally was at the scene of 2 train derailments when I was in the PSAP.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, see, I
so-
just kind of assumed the response teams that you call, they're at the dispatch office at maybe the fire department or the local police department, and they're never really going on site. So,
but they're still a part of, just like there's always a need to take that major incident out of the response of everything else.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of having emergency management, and the EOC communications is a part of the EOC. So they do respond to the EOC. They also may respond to the scene if it's a large scale event. But again, it's not widely known. So
that's news to me, and I think that's really interesting. And because what I was trying to go maybe get at was, does the emergency response training community come and provide you training with some realistic, examples of what to expect, or here's case studies that, so to give the 911 operators a kind of a mental understanding of what they may be dealing with when they get a call scenario like that, I guess is what I was kind of going at.
The answer to that typically is no.
Okay.
But that isn't completely true, because 911 can go to these trainings when they're offered, especially when emergency managers or their fire chiefs that they work with provide them with the information that there's this class, and they will send, many centers do send people to that so that they are aware of what's going on. But that said, many more are not invited.
Sure. Right.
So it's important that we do create the training. My organization has a standard for public safety answering point and railroad interactions
Okay.
for various different types of incidents that railroads have.
Okay.
Actually, that standard's in the process of being updated right now. So the summit was actually quite
Timely.
for me because I have wrote down a handful of things that I want to ensure that is in that standard.
Well, that's really good. You've listened to a lot of stakeholders, discuss things, but I guess I'd be interested to know is like, what are some of the biggest challenges you face with your organization in providing response readiness for the hazmat community when you guys get the call?
The part of the challenge is knowing if you don't have a procedure in place,
Mm-hmm.
knowing precisely what they need, having the appropriate tools at the fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
One of the tools that was talked about in great detail this week was AskRail.
AskRail, yeah.
The AskRail app is not something that is widely known in the 911 community. And to be quite honest, the initial approach was put it on every responder's device, right? So every responder would have it.
Right.
But in reality,
not everyone needs it.
Not only do they not need it, but they expect 911, the dispatch center, to provide all of the data. That's who does all of that digging, right? So they answer the call, they obtain the information, they do research based on the information that they receive, and then they coordinate the response.
See, that is becoming more of an interesting conversation. It's kind of like, oh, how did we miss that by deploying this app and not, doing in-depth training to the 911 operators?
Well, and quite frankly, even knowing that it's available, right?
Yeah.
So it's just one of the tools, and that's truly what ends up happening in 911 is that because they are the forgotten ones.
Yeah.
The tools that they need to be able to do their job effectively oftentimes lag behind, and they learn by happenstance, right? Not because it was a forethought.
Right.
And to be quite honest, when organizations like PHMSA create rules,
right,
it's important to understand all aspects. And we've actually had many conversations with PHMSA very recently, which is how I got invited, because they've gotten a couple of rules that they have put out for comment, and we have commented on those rules.
Right.
And because of those comments, they went,
how did we forget these people?
Why haven't we been inviting them to the table? So that's...
Well, it's good that you saw the need to respond to the response for comments because it has some sort of an effect on your job duties. And so you're putting your voice out there to those. That's great. And then they recognize that, oh my goodness, we weren't even thinking about them, which was kind of like the big aha moment today in our plenary discussion. I was like, oh, okay. And that was pretty impressive. I think another thing that really struck to me that was like, wow, was that, 65% of the firefighters are volunteer firefighters throughout our country. And we're talking volunteer firefighters. I mean, they're great, passionate people, but they don't have the funding they need compared to like a normal municipality, firefighting organization. They're strapped very thin for, staff. They're worked pretty hard because they work a full-time job. And I mean, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is more, I guess, concerning than I thought.
Yeah. Your career firefighters they train all of the time. They have a lot more resources at their fingertips. And you're absolutely right. Our volunteer departments, they're definitely strapped for cash. They only get what they need. And quite frankly, they don't get the new pretty shiny trucks and all of the great gadgets.
Yeah.
They scrimp and save and get gently used equipment and things like that.
Right.
Because
That's what they can afford.
Well, exactly. And we're talking about typically volunteers are in less population dense locations.
Sure.
So the tax base and the ability for them to have the funding is different. You have a lot of very dedicated individuals. They just don't have a lot of time
Right.
to be able to attend a lot of different types of trainings, as well as, they're volunteers. So
Right.
you're going to get them for as long as they have the time.
Right.
And
it's a daunting task to think about the challenges that group of individuals faces to keep the public safe and do the best they can to respond and still meet some of the training expectations and equipment needs. And so, yeah, it's my heart's going out to the volunteer firefighters more and more every time I start to even think about it, just because of what I've learned here at the conference this week. It's like, wow. We'll talk about some of the training you provide your members and your organization. And I can't remember. Did you mention how many members are in your organization?
Yep, we have about almost 20. We're approaching about 25,000 members.
Wow.
And of those members, there's about, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, we have about 100,000 911 professionals in the United States.
Okay, so it's a good. I mean, there's more that aren't in the group than could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. But most of the time, what happens is it's a lot of times it's the chief or the the director of the 911 center or a 911 manager or something in along those lines. And then we do have a growing membership of telecommunicators, public safety telecommunicators. So,
how are you seeing, say, the newer generation of members, staff coming into the industry? What's that like? Have you had to adjust your approach to training with them?
The approach to training hasn't really been adjusted much at this point, but we have had to approach recruitment and retention differently.
Right.
Recruitment is something that you now have to go where the people are, as opposed to, for years and years, we posted a job on
they would just show up
our website, or before websites, we put it out in the newspaper, right? And today, that's just not something that you're not going to attract the people that you need in that capacity. And we are facing, just like every other entity, we are facing staffing shortages. On average, across the United States, we're facing about a 30% staffing shortage, and we have some 911 centers that are, have shortages up to 85%.
Oh, wow!
And so, how you do the job, how you the types of services you provide in those situations have to be adjusted.
So when you're looking for recruits, what types of individuals are you looking for? Are they communication majors? Are these degreed people? Are they non-degree? I mean, what's the ideal, or is there an ideal kind of candidate for? Because I got to imagine it's a bit of a stressful job too.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe talk about that.
Yeah. So when we're looking for individuals, both college, we would love to hire folks with a college degree, but we don't have a college degree that is specifically for the 911 profession.
Sure.
So we consider it a skilled trade.
Okay.
We bring folks in and we train them. And the typical training lasts anywhere from 3 months, maybe in a smaller 911 center, upwards of 18 months in a very large urban 911 center. And the reason being is the varying degrees that they perform in those different organizations. And so the people that we're looking for are people who are who have a really good head on their shoulders, who are who are willing, not just caring individuals, but who can really who are leaders,
Right.
right? You need somebody who can not only be somebody who's caring about the caller, but you need somebody who can also take charge of that situation
Yeah.
and be willing to lead them through that call and help not only lead them through the call, hold down that scene until the responders get there, and then coordinate that response as well. So it's somebody who is very good at multitasking. Believe it or not, people who have ADHD work really, really well in a 911 center
I could see that.
because you are always, your brain is constantly
Popping.
firing
Yeah.
in 5 different directions. Well, that makes very good 911 professionals.
Because it's always something interesting that's satisfying the neurons in their mind, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So that's really great. Would it be safe to say that, say, a 911 operator in, say, the city of Indianapolis versus a 911 operator in, a rural community that's maybe, 10,000 people,
Mhm.
50 is different?
Yes,
in
slightly.
capacity
In some ways, they are different. In other ways, they're exactly the same,
Sure.
right? In that call, in answering the call and handling that call, they're going to
do
be
the
the
same.
same.
Right.
But the differences come into play because I mentioned that it's a local entity, right?
Yeah.
Public safety is local. Depends. If you have, in my former PSAP, the PSAP that I ran, we had 32 different police, fire, and EMS agencies. And so how I answered the 911 call was exactly the same. How I dispatched the 32 different
Different.
police, fire, and EMS is very different. And there's a level of varying degrees of service that they are going to provide. And, fire department A may go out for every accident. They may, they have first responders, they do all of these things.
Mhm.
Fire department B may not do any of those things. And there is a difference too between career fire departments
Right.
and the complexity of dispatching a career fire department versus the complexity of dispatching a volunteer.
Yeah. Right.
So, career departments may have 4 or 5 different stations and they have move ups and they do all of these things that the volunteer stations do not do. So it can be extremely complicated.
Yeah. I can see
in
that.
degrees.
See, that's kind of one of the, another analysis that came out of this conference was like, this is a complex issue. It's not straightforward, and everyone's got certain requirements or job tasks that, they're part of this whole effort of emergency responding to an incident, but they don't understand. Most people probably wouldn't even understand the complexity of a 911 operator and what they got to go through versus the guy who's got to suit up and go fight a fire versus a guy who's got to be the community mouthpiece to, deal with the public and tell them everything's going to be okay. And we're going to clean up your site when we're done and calm their fears versus, and environmental cleanup. And when you start thinking through it all, it is a very complex scenario. And so it's interesting that we're getting the perspective of the 911, the very first caller. And I think it's fantastic what you're bringing to the table here. So what has been your observations from being invited to this conference and how you fit into the narrative and supporting the efforts here with this conference?
I feel like I made a mark already by just being here.
Yeah.
And in case you didn't notice, I'm not very shy. So
well, that's good.
I definitely will stand up and lend my voice. And I think that that's really important. I think being here has already provided some different insights. And things that may need to be tweaked as far as training is concerned, as far as ensuring that the right people are at the table and having these conversations. And quite frankly, we're talking about training and funding and all of those things. Well, you need to think about all of the different legs that maybe there's some others that should have been at this table this week.
Right.
That weren't.
Right. Other stakeholders,
yes,
right?
Yes, there's a lot of different stakeholders and they all have different needs. And it's more than just the hazmat response, but the hazmat response is extremely important.
Sure. Right. And I think that's one of the things I took away from this conference is that, there are other stakeholders. We need to bring them to the table and also be part of the conversation. Some of the newer ones that, some of the stakeholders that came that I just didn't, like you guys, I didn't think about. When you talk about, having your dispatchers, know who they need to call and develop that, kind of call tree scenario where who you call in this scenario. What about developing those relationships with those entities prior to these types of scenarios actually ever happening? Do you have meetings with the fire departments and the police departments and you guys are able to like, hey, I'm April and I'm your gal here that's going to be, calling you and who do I call for this and that? And let's, connect, right?
Yeah. So within the public safety entities, yes.
Okay.
So you typically will have a fire and EMS community. There's usually either some sort of committee or part of your board hierarchy. And that committee helps set the procedures that are going to be how you're going to handle on a normal basis, various different types of calls. The same thing would happen where the law enforcement agencies are concerned. They're also going to set those processes. And it's different. 911 isn't created equal. So you have 911 centers that are local units of, maybe it's a city, and it can be ran independently where the 911 center answers directly to the mayor.
Okay.
Or it could be ran by a local police department. And sometimes, very infrequently, they're ran by a fire department. And so there's that scenario. Then you've got, more of a regional approach, maybe a sheriff's office that runs a 911 center. And then, or they're an independent entity that's
and they contract it out to another like entity like that provides that service?
Typically yes, it can be that. We have some nonprofits and we even have a couple of for-profit 911 entities. But for the most part, they are a part of a municipal government.
Gotcha.
So a lot of them will answer maybe to a county board of commissioners or an authority board that is made up of multiple different counties or a region, maybe multiple cities, that will have the authority board that has representatives from each of those entities there.
Right.
And then the funding is maybe contracted, but the municipalities are paying for those services.
Okay. So I guess a question for NENA, the association there, how are you guys funded?
NENA is a membership association.
So it's basically membership dues.
Yeah, membership dues. We also put on a couple of different, we have 3 different conferences a year. So we have our Standards and Best Practices Conference, which I'm extremely involved in.
Okay, good.
Because I'm responsible for the operational standards side of the house. But so that conference basically pulls thought leaders together. We discuss the standards that we're working on, or we report out brand new standards or updated standards that have recently been released. We have our 911 Goes to Washington event where we go to Capitol Hill and we educate our representatives and our senators on 911 issues.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah. And then we have our annual conference, which is our educational trade show, where we have 150 different sessions, educational sessions. Plus we have a show floor that has all of the different types of
vendors. Yeah. What type of vendors and technology are there? Like, I'm curious.
Interestingly enough, technology is the world we really live in. So we have computer-aided dispatch entities. We have the call handling equipment. We have various different over-the-top vendors that provide services like video and language translation, educational vendors. If you can think it up, we have it.
Okay.
Because 911, like I said, 911 is the data hub for that public
like it.
safety world.
I like it. I mean, I think this is kind of an interesting interview for me personally, but also just because I think listeners will start to go, oh, wow. They didn't really realize the impact or the involvement of 911's, efforts or participation in emergency response. And you guys are, like you said, you're the first line of defense, and there's a lot of decisions that are being made, and a lot of people are being dispatched and called, and it's because people are like the 911 operators are sourcing the information, and like you mentioned earlier, knowing that Ask Rail is available, and now they can do a little digging and say, okay, well, this you're going out to this train derailment, and this car is full of hydrogen chloride, so be careful. Yep. Because you just figured out from the consist on the information inside that helps the responders go into the incident and at least be aware of what's happening.
Absolutely. So you don't want them to run into a cloud and not make it out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's huge. So it sounds to me like, too, based on what I'm hearing, is maybe you guys have more opportunities to kind of push a little harder to get in front of the response managers and get your seat at the table, because you demand it more, I guess. Maybe, I don't know, maybe.
I think it's just really educating them. When I spoke to the folks at FEMSA, they were like, oh my gosh, we didn't think about that. It was in 2022 when the pipeline, there was a pipeline rule that was made and went into effect in October that we didn't know anything about regarding when the need to call 911 or a 911 center for multiple different things, not just a burst pipeline, but also for anything that's potential, and that we just are calling to tell you that this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And we're sending people to investigate it. We really don't want you to do anything. And we went, time out. 911 is not in the business of not doing something with information. We must provide that information to the appropriate authorities. So although we're going to get the call, we're also we then had to go to our fire departments and say, just so you know, there's this rule that you need to know about.
Right.
And that we need to know how we tweak our processes for you. Because when we're told, do you want us to tone you out to respond, or do you want us to call the fire chief? Do you want us to, call the station house and say, hey, FYI, we just got this call. Yeah. How do you want this to be handled? Because we can't sit on it.
Right. That's good insight. And I'm sure that they went, oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah.
Well, and that's when I actually started the conversations with FEMSA saying, just so you know, probably in the future, 911 should know more about some rules.
We're one of your stakeholders that you need to consult with. Right.
And it was good that those conversations started, and then we also started, watching to make sure that whatever notice of proposed rulemaking,
you were going to comment.
We were going to be watching to see what.
And you need to do that as the membership organization for your constituency, exactly, which is all the 911 operators. So that's you're doing your job.
Interestingly enough, there's a lot of federal entities that are now moving into the realm of 911 that never did before. So FEMSA is one of them. Yep. Another one is SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency.
Okay, didn't know about that one.
Yeah, so they've recently deployed 988, which is the new National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
Oh, okay, I do know that one.
But there's interactions between 988 and 911, and and there's a lot of interconnectivity that has to
Sure.
happen. So that's yet another federal entity that is making rules.
That sounds like a
that-
whole bunch of new
yes.
NENA members.
Well, and it also sounds
Right.
like a whole bunch of new NENA stuff to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Goodness gracious. Well, I mean, it sounds like this organization is doing great work. I'm so glad that you came to the summit and represented your stake in the response community. And I think there's lots more to be learned from this engagement. I'm sure PHMSA is extremely excited about it. I know the emergency responder communities and the fire departments were like, oh yeah, okay. And what about the local communities, and the LAPCs there too? I mean, like, okay, so I think that was like, this is going to be good for everybody. And so I'm really glad you were here, and I'm really glad we got to have a conversation about this because I think it's super important. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, April.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.